I think we're ready to roll. Can we actually just get the door closed back there? Thank you. Okay, so Minister Amery will start his remarks, and then we'll move on to questions afterwards.
All right, well, good afternoon, and thank you for joining me today. In September, the federal government announced a pilot project for their firearm confiscation scheme. Our government made it clear that we would not enforce this gun grab, because simply put, this is not about public safety. It will not stop violent criminals, and it will not stop illegal guns from being smuggled across our borders. We will oppose any policy that undermines law-abiding firearm owners and does not combat the criminal use of firearms. That's why today, I'll be introducing a motion under the Alberta Sovereignty Within a United Canada Act to defend lawful firearm owners and ensure Albertans know that they have the right to use reasonable force to defend themselves, their families, and their homes from intruders if they ever need to. If passed by the legislature, the motion will instruct every single provincial entity, including law enforcement agencies such as municipal police forces, to decline to enforce or implement the federal gun seizure program. The motion also makes clear that Albertans have the right to use reasonable force to defend themselves, their families, and their homes from intruders. Under this motion, the Minister of Public Safety and Emergency Services will advise law enforcement that Alberta's focus is addressing violent crime. As Alberta's Attorney General, I will regularly review directives to the Alberta Crown Prosecution Service that provides guidelines to prosecutors not to prosecute home defense offenses when it is not in the public interest. We will not hesitate to use every single legal tool available to protect Albertans from misguided and expensive federal policies, and to respect every single Albertan's ability to protect themselves and their families within their own homes. One's home is their castle. It is sacred. It is why the Criminal Code recognizes the invasion of one's right to their privacy in their homes, for example, as a more serious breach than other types of theft of property. And in the worst case scenario, Albertans should feel confident that they won't be thrown in jail for defending themselves and their loved ones. The federal government's approach will not have any impact on gun crime here in this country. We know that nearly all violent gun crime in Canada is not committed by legal firearm owners, but by those who obtain weapons illegally through our nation's porous borders. Turning previously legal firearms into prohibited ones does nothing to make our streets safer. It simply punishes those who have acted in good faith and who have proven that they know how to follow provincial and federal law. Our position is grounded in law and in principle. The Alberta Sovereignty Within a United Canada Act was enacted to defend our province's interests when federal actions are unconstitutional or when they are harmful to Albertans. This act recognizes Alberta's unique culture and identity in Canada and affirms our right to preserve and promote values that Albertans hold dear. Thank you very much. I'll now take any questions you may have.
Okay, so we'll start with questions here in the room. One question, one follow-up, then we'll move to the phones. We have a hard stop at 1:05, so we can get into the House. So let's start with Janet.
In your remarks, you referred to defending yourself, your family, and your property, your home, but the motion doesn't actually address anything to do with defense of property. So I'm just trying to understand what is changing in your direction to prosecutions regarding how they would react if someone harmed someone who is threatening specifically their property, not people.
Well, look, specifically, we know that the Criminal Code allows for the reasonable use of defense to deter an invasion into one's home where an individual law-abiding homeowner feels a sense of fear or is using a self-defense to protect either themselves or their loved ones. And in the context of somebody coming into somebody's home here in Alberta, the guidelines to the prosecution will make it absolutely clear that we have no public interest in prosecuting individual homeowners from protecting their homes, their loved ones, and themselves from the threat of somebody coming into that home. That is sacred to us, and we think it's important that Albertans understand that. So the direction and the advice and the guidelines that will be issued to the prosecution, at least in my capacity as Attorney General, and certainly in the capacity of Minister Ellis as the Minister for Public Safety as it relates to policing detachments, is that we want them to focus on priorities of serious and violent criminals. We expect those directions and guidelines to be followed, and that when there's no public interest in prosecuting people who are simply defending themselves and their loved ones, that we would not stand behind the move to prosecute law-abiding Albertans.
So what are the consequences for the Crown then, since you can't direct individual prosecutions, if they proceed prosecuting somebody that you think doesn't align with that policy?
Yeah. Well, look, I mean, I want to make it absolutely clear. I do not direct the individual prosecutions of an individual matter, nor does the Minister of Public Safety direct an individual policing investigation. But what is certainly within my purview as Attorney General is the ability to issue guidelines to the Alberta Crown Prosecution on what we think are priorities for that agency. Those are priorities that we expect to be followed, and that's what we're doing here with this review. That's what I'm doing here with this review, and I expect that the Minister of Public Safety will do the same when it comes to policing agencies in our province. On a whole, there is nothing wrong, and certainly I'm entitled to do that when it comes to our prosecution services, and I intend to do that. I intend to issue lawful and proper protocols to our Crown Prosecution Service, and I expect them to be followed. Now, in the past, we've done the same. You might recall that we issued a number of guidelines over my term here as a Minister and Attorney General, and all of those have been followed as we would have expected. We have a good collaborative and healthy relationship with the Crown Prosecution, and I hope that we'll continue to do that. So I'm not going to speculate on what will happen to an individual prosecutor or anything like that, because our guidelines, our working relationship has been very strong and positive, and I hope that it will continue that way.
Morgan?
So recognizing you're saying this is provincial jurisdiction, but today the federal public safety minister said that they will be demanding compliance. Mm-hmm. So with that, what is the next step then for Alberta? You're going to do one thing, the federal government says you will not.
Look, the federal government has enacted this gun buyback scheme, and it's been ongoing for several years now. But we know that provinces, not just Alberta, but provinces across the country, are simply not buying into this scheme. We know that Ontario and Saskatchewan, along with Alberta, have been very vocal about their intention not to cooperate with the federal government's decision to implement this gun buyback program. And we know that there are examples, one of which is the obvious one is the Cape Breton pilot project, where the federal government announced that they would begin by piloting the buyback in Cape Breton and expected to collect 200 firearms from that pilot. The rumors indicate that they've only collected 22 firearms. And so we think that, again, this is a clear indication that Canadians simply do not buy into this scheme. We know that $750 million thus far has been allocated to the gun buyback program, but that it disproportionately impacts law-abiding, honest Canadians. It's just a policy that we simply won't stand with. The federal government's free to enact whatever scheme buyback program they wish, and we're certainly within our purview not to cooperate with it.
And then for follow-up, do you foresee there being challenges between giving a directive to a body, like for instance you're saying municipal policing, RCMP, and then them not knowing whose directive to follow, like if they ask the federal government or the province?
Well, look, I think our provincial entities, our provincial agencies know full well that the province is the one that they will take guidelines and instructions from. So I don't foresee that to be a problem. I think yesterday, if any of you were at the news release yesterday with Minister Ellis, I think it was the chief of police there indicated that they would not intend to cooperate or comply with this, that it was of low priority for them too, that they have much bigger priorities to deal with. Serious criminals, the rampant bail problems that we're having across this country, catch and release issues, those are the problems that we're asking the federal government to dedicate their resources to. When you take a program that targets people who have done everything that they should have done, by taking the gun safety courses, by being properly vetted by the chief firearms officer, for example, and taking the appropriate hunter safety courses and gun handling courses and properly storing their firearms, and then creating criminals out of those individuals. Alberta will not stand by that. We cannot support it. Thank you.
Go ahead.
So my question would be, could the province potentially be liable? So the federal government sent us a statement saying that they fully expect Alberta gun owners to follow this, and if not, they could risk legal liability. So potentially, if they don't and they get charged and they actually do get found guilty, or a homeowner says, well, the province says I can defend my property, and it's a delivery driver who's showing up, accidentally made a wrong turn, and then they get shot at, could the province be legally liable for that?
So to answer your question, I mean, the criminal code creates the parameters for the scenarios for when somebody can defend themselves. That has to be a reasonable assessment by an individual homeowner, for example, that there is a threat to the safety of that individual or their loved ones. And we think that the guidelines that we're issuing, the guidelines that I'm issuing to the Alberta Crown Prosecution Service, will reinforce that. We'll say to the Crown Prosecution that we have no public interest in prosecuting individual Albertans who are defending themselves and their loved ones from a credible threat. And that is really the key word here. Now, the most important thing to keep in mind is that when we issue these guidelines, and they're available for everybody to take a look at as well, they will take a very good look at the circumstances of a particular case and determine that reasonableness. But we expect that when homeowners in Alberta are acting reasonably to defend themselves, their homes or their property or their loved ones, that the Crown Prosecution does not proceed with a prosecution. The other thing that I want to keep in mind, and I'll tell you guys a little bit about what the protocols will also ask our prosecutors to consider, is in a scenario, what was the likelihood of access, reasonable and timely access to an emergency response? And that is to give some consideration to rural and remote homes in Alberta. If a response time is long, that is a factor for consideration on how a homeowner chooses to respond to an imminent threat. What is the environment outside of a particular dwelling? Is it unknown to the homeowner? For example, are there others or potentially others that may be lingering outside? And also whether or not there is a presence of vulnerable people within a home. That's an important factor for consideration. If somebody tries to come into my home and I have young children, the Crown should be considering that as a factor in determining whether or not the response was reasonable. So there will be a whole suite of new guidelines that are coming forward to provide information to the Crown on their assessment of a particular file. But it just simply says at the end of the day, when a homeowner is acting responsibly and when they're defending their homes and their families, then that's okay.
Okay.
My follow-up would be, do you know how many gun owners in Alberta, how many there are, and how many would actually have guns on that list?
So we know that there are roughly 350,000 licensee holders, either PAL or RPAL in this province, and we know that some may have more than one gun. Some may not have any guns at all. It's difficult to know exactly how many guns there are, but we do know roughly how many holders of either a PAL or RPAL there are. But here's another interesting statistic for all of you. One of the things that the Chief Firearms Office tracks is revocation rates, and that is the rate of which a license is revoked from an individual Albertan for reasons that may give rise to some concern. One of those might be a relevant criminal charge. One of them might be where police inform the Chief Firearms Office of a particular encounter or a particular call that might be cause for concern. These are the types of statistics that are relevant here, particularly for our conversation about why we oppose the federal gun buyback scheme. The revocation rate here in Alberta for license holders is a tiny fraction of 1%. And that gives you a sense of how many individuals who are actually responsible, law-abiding gun owners realistically are committing problems or even involved in encounters that might give rise to some concern. We don't believe that they are the problem. That's the bottom line. We believe that the folks that are committing the crimes are not purchasing, acquiring, or storing guns legally. They're the ones that are getting the guns from illegal sources and using them in serious and violent crimes. And in fact, I think you've heard it, but I'll repeat it one last time. 9 out of 10 crimes involving guns involves a gun that is acquired illegally. So we're just asking the federal government to focus on the root cause of the problem, and the root cause of the problem is gun violence involving criminals who obtain their guns illegally. We need them to focus on that and spend their resources to do that.
Where was that stat, Bill, the 9 out of 10? Where did you get that stat?
I can get it for you. It's widely available.
Feel free to shoot me an email. We'll move to the phones now. Operator, can we get our first caller, please?
Rahim Mohammed at Post Media. Please go ahead.
Hi, Minister Amery. I'm wondering if these measures encounter federal resistance or get held up in the court for some reason, if the notwithstanding clause is potentially a tool that can be on the table, given that these are law-abiding gun owners we're talking about, and this is not strictly a federal criminal code matter, this is a personal freedoms matter?
Yeah, thank you for that question. Look, I think, what we have right now is, two competing positions. We know what the federal government is telling Canadians that they hope to achieve. We know that our position is very different and quite contrary to that. I'm not prepared to speculate on whether the notwithstanding clause would be used, is being considered, but I can certainly say, or even that it applies, but I can say that it is currently not being considered as a response at this time.
Do you have a follow-up, Rahim?
Sure. And are you aware of any discussions either being led by the Premier or the respective federal and provincial public safety ministers about a potential climb down from the federal gun confiscation program, which the federal public safety minister himself has said that he doesn't think is the system that he would have created if he'd had a choice? Is there any dialogue that you're aware of that's ongoing? Do you see potential for a kind of federal climb down or some sort of agreement between Ottawa and Alberta on what looks like something the federal government is increasingly less and less keen on?
Yeah, excellent question, and thank you for that. Look, we've heard from Albertans almost universally that crime is becoming worse and worse. We know that this is a sentiment that's being echoed all across Canada. We know that, when we spoke to our federal counterparts and we're in ongoing conversations with them, that the program itself, the gun buyback program, doesn't address the issues that Canadians are complaining about. We know that it won't provide a single dollar to prosecution agencies anywhere in the country. And we know that it won't shore up our law enforcement. It won't shore up border security. It does nothing to address the causes of violent crime in this country. So we think that our position is well grounded. To go directly to your question, I think, yes, we are in constant conversations regularly with our federal counterparts, including the Federal Minister of Public Safety, along with his team. Those conversations resulted in the amnesty programs that came about some years ago and more recently. They also resulted in some of the grandfathering that you may have seen in recent years. And we're hopeful that with the continued pressure that the federal government is receiving and some of the resistance from very common sense approaches, including the one here in Alberta, in Ontario, and Saskatchewan, and perhaps the not so obvious ones, again, like the one in Cape Breton, that the federal government will come to the table and negotiate a proper agreement that sees resources being dedicated to sources that actually address public safety in this country.
Okay, we have one more time for one more question on the phones. Operator, can we get the next caller, please?
Will Buster at Western Standard. Please go ahead.
My question would be, with the recent improvement in relations with the federal government, was there hesitancy to move forward with this motion defying kind of what they're asking right now?
No hesitancy. Look, I think we've demonstrated time and again that we're very much willing to work with any level of government, especially when it comes to some policies that are beneficial for Albertans. And with the recent announcements that happened last week with respect to the pipeline and the clean electricity regulations and others, we were very positive and very much a good partner in that. When we know that a policy is flawed, we certainly will stand up for Albertans first and foremost, as we always have. And we know that with this motion, we are unequivocally saying that our sympathies will lie with law-abiding Albertans. Look, Albertans deserve to feel safe in their homes, full stop. We're not going to apologize for that whatsoever. And our sympathies lie with those law-abiding individuals here in Alberta. It certainly doesn't lie with the criminals who have terrorized people, who have caused them to fear for their own safety within their homes and elsewhere. And certainly not with the criminal organizations and the individuals who have run roughshod over our criminal justice system because of weak federal bail and criminal laws. So I think, Raheem, to answer your question in a very direct way, where a policy is good and it is good for Alberta, we will certainly stand by it and we'll be great partners in Federation. But where something is inappropriately targeting and disproportionately creating criminals out of law-abiding Albertans, we will stand opposed through and through.
Do you have a follow-up?
Yeah, just quickly, you mentioned the continued possession of prohibited firearms, but moving forward, will there be a way for individuals to obtain the ability or gain the ability to obtain these prohibited firearms or these newly prohibited firearms?
I'm not sure I mentioned anything about prohibited firearms. What I'll say is this: there are regular conversations happening with our federal counterparts, and I think what you might be referring to are some of the amnesty and grandfathering agreements that we have, and we're very hopeful that that continues to be implemented. We've been talking about that with our federal counterparts. We're hoping that one way out for them is to start negotiating in ways like that to help current and existing lawful firearm owners continue to keep and use their guns. But we're not quite there yet, I would say.
Okay, sorry, that's all the time we have. We have to go. I'm sorry. I know he has to hop on the phone with somebody quickly.
That was the deal. 105. I got to run. I'm sorry, you guys. But if there's any follow-ups, please reach out to Heather, and we most certainly will get to you. Thank you.
Yeah.